I don't have a question, but I wanted everybody to hear the conversation that we had had. This was not just an explanation of how wonderful we women are, but it was marriage counseling for husband and wife. And she said she does use this story because the equal relationship across the table, the companionship is, I'm glad to hear it's what God designed.
That's God's design. Yeah,
And it's beautiful.
thanks. Thank you, Beth. Other thoughts, questions, comments you guys have?
I have a question.
Okay,
I know the answer, I think, but I'm asking it because I'm sure if I have been asking, somebody else probably is thinking the same thing.
okay.
So today's story is this is Pride Month, right?
Mhm.
Today's story is very heteronormative,
Mhm.
which means that it's man and woman, right? No in-betweens. And we talked about male and female gender roles,
Right.
but no other gender roles. How do those fit into this story? And how do we, as reading Genesis 1 and 2, make those things line up?
Yeah, okay. That's a great question, Daryl. And I imagined that was on people's minds or some people's minds today. So I wanted today to just preach from the text, the text that we have in front of us, and treat it with, fully. So we heard what the relationship between, because it goes to that next step and says, this is why a man leaves his house and clings to his wife and why the two become one. And, it really is about heterosexual marriage. But the whole notion that we are created as relational beings and that we are, it's not good for anybody to be alone, that, if there are certainly biblical interpreters and church people who would say that this text is a text that says, homosexuality is wrong or something like that. And it doesn't actually say that. This is just a text about the goodness of relationships between men and women when they're good, right? And for me, I don't want to take anything away from that, but I actually think that the text is more about mutuality than gendered sexuality. That's my personal opinion, that what I think it's getting at is we need to have relationships where we have each other's back, where we have somebody in our life who is an ally. And it can be a friend, it can be a relative, it can be someone of your same gender with whom you have a partnership and decide right now it's legal. And marriage is really, at the bottom line, it's a legal relationship, one that that the state recognizes. And there are all kinds of relationships that people can have that are blessed by God. And so to me, because it is legal for same-sex unions to happen, at least here in California, I see that the kind of the insight of this text speaks to any partnership like that, to me. And so I know not everyone would agree with that, and that's okay. But that's what I would say. I think the mutuality that is being discussed is something that is what people, need and should be looking for and should try to correct if it is not already in the primary relationship like that. I don't know. Anybody want to challenge that or say more? Personally, I haven't read, I know a lot of Christian pastors have read a lot of books about, kind of in favor, speaking positively about same-sex marriage and, that kind of thing. And we have some even on our church staff who've read more than I have about it and could probably give a better answer than that. But that's not, that I still think it's the mutuality that is what's really being pointed to, and not that it's a man and a woman necessarily. Yeah, Astrid.
So I just wanted to thank you for specifically taking this scripture outside of the context of marriage. Because I think many times it's been taken that way. And, of course it does speak to marriage, but it also speaks to, as you said, relationships. And it's for those like myself that have chosen a celibate life, it's been challenging. And it's been challenging for other folks that,
Yeah.
Use the scripture to say, yeah, you need to settle down and get married because that's what good Christians do.
Right.
When throughout church history, there have been, and in the Bible, there have been individuals that have been called to not to marry.
Right.
So, thank you.
Yeah. And, I'm not married anymore as a widow. And, I still think we all need that person. We need somebody who has our back. And so, yeah, for sure. Yeah, Beth.
I do have a question after all. Where does this patriarchal look at life
Mhm.
come from? Is it because God gave the keys of the kingdom to Peter? I mean, where does this start?
No, it's earlier than that, Beth. It's cultural. It's certainly cultural. And, and to me, the whole issue about homosexuality is also a cultural construct in the Bible where, the Bible doesn't say anything particularly positive about homosexuality. It hardly says anything at all about homosexuality. There are about 7 texts where it's even mentioned in the Bible. And so it's, when you think about the other kinds of things that the Bible talks a lot about, this is very small potatoes for the biblical writers. But in the ancient Near Eastern culture, it was taboo. And, I was doing some teaching for First Pres in Berkeley. They decided, we got to get to the bottom of this at our church. We don't know what to think about this. And, we kind of, our gut's telling us to be more open, but our Bible teachers have told us always, that the Bible says it's a no-go and, we shouldn't, homosexuality is bad. And so they said, let's look at all the texts. And I was one of the presenters, and the text that I was asked to speak on was the text from Leviticus 18 that says, a man shall not lay with a man, it is an abomination to the Lord. You look at that and go, okay, well, what else do you need, right? It seems like that's so obvious, obviously, God's, this is an abomination. But if you look at Leviticus 18, I don't know if you want to look at it with me. Okay, it's on page 183 on the Bibles that are on your chairs. It says unlawful sexual relations. That's the heading for it. And this text about, man not laying with a man is completely embedded in this whole long list of all of the sexual relationships that are looked down upon, right? Do not dishonor your father by having sexual relations with your mother. She's your mother. Do not have relations with her. Do not have sexual relations with your father's wife. That would dishonor your father, as if your father's wife is somebody different than your mother. Do not have sexual relations with your sister, either your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, stepsister, right? Whether she was born in the same home or elsewhere. Don't have sexual relations with your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter. That would dishonor you, etc. And it goes on. And you know, and then it says, let's see, do not have sexual relations with your neighbor's wife. Do not give any of your, okay. So let's see, where is it? It's
Where are you? Leviticus what?
Leviticus 18 on page 183, right?
22.
23, 22. Oh, yeah, okay, right. And do not, right before that, don't give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech, right? No child sacrifice. And don't lie with a man as one does with a woman. That's detestable. Do not have sexual relations with an animal or defile yourself with it. Okay, so a few things about that. You could say that clearly the Bible, by the Bible embedding this text in with text about incest, right? And what the other peoples do, like don't do child sacrifice, because that's what the people who worship the god Molech do, right? Or you know, having
Yeah, those Moloch.
sorry,
Those Moloch.
put your microphone up where I can hear you.
Moloch, they're really bad.
Oh yeah, bad news, totally bad news. Or, you know, bestiality, right? Because this was something that the other peoples did. So if you think about the context for this text, they were a small, rural, agrarian people that lived together in tribal units, right? The 12 tribes of Israel. And you could think about, you know, how we think about these tribal warlords in Afghanistan and that kind of thing, right? It's like an elder in charge of, you know, these 100 people or whatever. It was even smaller groups that you could imagine. Well, if you are living with a small group of, you know, your relatives, and then somebody comes, you know, and marries into your clan, right? What's, you know, what is going to be the impact of sleeping with somebody who's not your wife in that small little community?
War.
Okay, right? Somebody's gonna be really mad about that, mad enough to kill somebody, probably, right? It's gonna tear apart the relationships in, right? So you can say that on the one hand, you could argue that it's a moral thing. God just doesn't like it, right? God doesn't like that we do, you know, it's an abomination. But there's lots of things that says it's an abomination to the Lord. One of the things that's an abomination to the Lord is children that don't obey their parents. That's an abomination. So if you're going to lift up the homosexual relationships with all of the list of things that are an abomination, it's like we do a bunch of those other things pretty regularly in our cultural context, right? So I'm thinking, what is the command to human beings, right? Be fruitful and multiply, and take care of your space that you're in, right? There's that beautiful psalm that talks about, you know, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord keeps watch over the city could be breached at any time. It's like it all depends on, you know, God's care and goodness or whatever. And then the next little, it's only like 5 verses in this psalm. And then the next little chunk says, blessed are those who have a lot of children, right? They're like arrows in your arrow pack or whatever. Quiver, thank you. And why is that? Well, if you've got to go down to the gate where people are making judgments, say you've got a dispute, and you've got all these people on your side, all your family comes, and there's 10 of you, and there's 3 of these people over here. Who do you think is going to prevail in a situation like that? Probably the bigger group, right? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. You know, it's like, it helps you to have a big family. You can be more successful in your farming venture and, right? And so like people who can't have children, look at a text like that in the Bible and say, the Bible is telling me I'm wrong, I'm bad, there's something off about me because I don't have children, because it's saying it's blessed to have children, right? And it can be hurtful and painful to people because that's what it says on the face value of that text. But if you think about the context of it, you know, if somebody's having relationships, the men are over here having relationships and they're not producing more children, nobody benefits from that, right? Because the benefit to the group is more children. And, you know, and so the way that the text describes all of this, it says that's not what God wants for us. God wants this: productive, big clans, we can take care of ourselves. If we have to go to war with somebody, we're good. You know, this is how the biblical writers in that time frame are thinking. And the whole idea of divorcing somebody was because if you got divorced, you had no social role anymore, because all women their role in society depends on the men in their life. First their father, then their husband, then their children, right? And so if you divorce a woman and put her out of your household, where's she going to go? If she goes back home, the brothers are like, you know, well, you know, we don't want you here. That's another mouth to feed with your children. And, you know, you shouldn't have got yourself divorced. Or what did you do to make your husband mad? And blah, blah, blah. Right. And there were social consequences for the woman in a divorce. Today, we could argue it both ways. We could say, well, there are some social consequences for women who are divorced. But it's nothing like it was in that day of the Old Testament world, the ancient world, or first century Palestine. And so when, you know, when there's a divorce in our culture, it's heartbreaking and sad. But like my sister got a divorce when she was very young, and she grew up in the church, and she was having a relationship with an older guy, and my mom was all upset about it. And he said, oh, I'll marry you, that's no big deal. And they got married. And like 18 months later, they were getting a divorce because she didn't know he was actually an alcoholic, and she didn't want to live with that. And there were things she didn't know. And so they kind of rushed into this thing. Then they got divorced. Then she started going to a Bible church in Iowa City. And the pastors and everybody told her she was like defective because she was divorced. And if she had a relationship with somebody else, she was going to be committing adultery, because that's what the Bible says. And this is one of those cases, I think, where, you know, we have to think about what's the spirit of the law? What's the spirit of what's being said? It's a justice issue more than some kind of like morality issue, I think. And so, or you certainly can make that case. And, you know, I believe there are times, like I encourage everyone who's married to try to stay married. You know, I'm all for it. You know, the Selbs made it 57 years, right? And we got some other 50 plus marriages here in this room, which is amazing and awesome. I love that. But that doesn't mean there aren't times when it makes sense. It actually would be wrong for a couple to stay together because you know, it perpetuates a cycle of abuse or something like that. You know, it's not that we don't try and get counseling and all those things, but sometimes it's okay to get divorced. And, you know, and I think that's what Jesus would say because of the whole trajectory of the Bible being about grace. Daryl.
I'm glad you brought up the cultural context of things.
Huh?
And you actually highlighted it, maybe not meaning to, when you said, you know, don't sleep with your mother and then don't sleep with your husband's wife.
Right.
You know,
Right.
culturally marriage.
They
was
had
a different
multiple-
thing back then.
right?
I mean, so there were differences just in the way people related to one another, right, than what we have today. And Beth mentioned the patriarchy.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
okay, right, okay.
She mentioned the patriarchy, and it was detestable for a man who was supposed to be the pinnacle of the power structure to submit to another man, like a woman,
Mm,
you know?
mm.
That
That's
was-
part of the patriarchy.
That's part of the patriarchy. It's
Patriarchy, bad.
bad, patriarchy, bad. So we have a question?
Well, how did that get started? Where?
Okay,
how-
so-
where-
Well, what I'm saying, so here's the thing, Beth. Here's the question that has to get answered by any interpreter of the Bible. You know, the Bible we call it the scandal of particularity. It's scandalous in a way that God chooses to enter the world in a particular time in world history and in a particular place, the Middle East. Why didn't God come to China? Why didn't God come to the United States in 1776? You know, like does that mean that God is sort of like baptizing the culture that God came into in the ancient world or in the Middle East or first century Palestine when Jesus became a man? Or is it that all cultures are broken and it wouldn't really matter when God came? But what matters is that we can tell when it's broken. And we can say, you know, okay, that's the situation, but, you know, what we learn from the self-giving, other affirming, community forming love, the love of God that Jesus showed us in the person of Jesus, right? And the activity of the death and resurrection and all that, then, you know, then we have to hold all cultures up to what we know about the gospel and say, you know, oh, our culture needs some refining, right?
My question still is floating in the air. Where did male dominance come from? What's the foundation for this? Is it because man is bigger and stronger? Does it go back to Peter and giving the keys of the church? I mean,
Yeah.
how did it get started?
So it's definitely not, yeah, I mean, it might be just the physical, like Charles just said, hunters, right? Men were hunters, women were gatherers. They had a division of labor in, you know, in the early, you know, or in, you know, there's still cultures like that are,
And some have women
right?
dominance.
and some are matriarchal, not very many, but there are occasions, you know, where a culture will be matriarchal. I don't know the answer to that, Beth, but you know, it's probably in a book on, you know, the history of gendered relations, right? But what I'm trying to say is it's sin that led to that. Because this partnership, this like equal, like you're my ally, my partner, that's what the creation story, the two creation stories say, male and female, so God created them in God's own image. In God's image, he created them. Male and female, he created them. It's male and female as the co-humanity. Doesn't, you know, make a judgment of one over the other. It just says both are in the image of God in chapter 1. And in chapter 2, we know that what gets created is an Ezer Kenegdo, a helper corresponding to him across the table from him, right? Comes from the very same stuff and is therefore equal and the correct match for, right? And so that's you know, the problem is next chapter of Genesis, chapter 3, when they betray each other and start pointing the fingers at each other. And then the new normal is not, I've got your back and you've got my back, but, you know, how can I undermine you so I can have that position on top of you? So I would say it comes from sin.
Okay.
Michelle, can we get Michelle the microphone? Thank you, Daryl.
Sheldon, Adam. No, it's Michelle, then Adam.
Actually, I was looking for it. I thought of it.
Okay, you want to think about it for another minute? No worries. I know, Michelle, I often say half-baked things, so don't worry. You're not alone.
I'm curious about another part of your sermon.
Yeah,
As a career marriage and family therapist, right?
right.
People often found, people thought infidelity was the biggest risk in any relationship, whether it's heterosexual, homosexual, whatever. But I found something else you touched on today. Inability to accept differences and
Right.
hold those in tension.
Yep,
And also, which you just now touched on, the struggle to assert dominance and get your way. And I'm wondering if there's any thoughts you might have or scripture relative to that
Mhm.
problem
right.
that you could speak on.
Well, I thank you so much for that question, Adam. That I really appreciate that. That's spot on what I kind of wanted us to talk about in this session. I think all of those texts about submitting to one another, like, you know, wives submit to your husbands and husbands love your wives, that come in there's just a few, there's like 3 or 4 times in the New Testament letters that talk about that. And, you know, again, like some people would want to say, see, that submit thing is, you know, it is a patriarchy and a hierarchy. There's God, then there's men, then there's women, then there's children, then there's slaves, then there's, you know, like untouchables or like whatever. And honestly, that's basically when it says to submit to one another, it means, you know, like let go of having to have your way. And it can't just be one person consistently letting go and giving the other person their way, because then it becomes that thing I was talking about where there's just 1.5 people in the marriage instead of 2 fully embodied people, fully, you know, who exist in a relationship of mutuality. And I see that is one of the relationship killers, right? And I want to say another thing that, you know, I'll get to you in just a second again. Have you guys ever heard of the book? It was by a sociologist named Arlie Hochschild. She's a professor at Berkeley. She wrote a book called The Second Shift. The Second Shift. So I was reading that book because I had to write a magazine article for the seminary magazine on work-life balance for seminaries and pastors and people like myself. And in reading The Second Shift, she went and she embedded herself in all these households where there were 2 working parents. And she found in all of her research, and she's documenting everything, she found that at home, even though both the husband and wife go to work, at home, the wife does the lion's share of the domestic work. Housekeeping, shopping, cooking, childcare, you know, right? And the husband, like, you know, I get the car serviced. I do the gardening, you know? But if you look at the amount of time that she's documenting this whole thing, you know, this is how she gets the title of her book. You find that women work a second shift when they get home because they're doing so much work at the house. Now, I know a lot of you guys. I know I can point out men in this room who do the cooking, who do the shopping, who have been fantastic, in my opinion, partners to their wives. And I don't want anybody to feel like I'm talking you down. I'm impressed, big time. But do you know that in her research, she found that for every time a husband, and I don't know how she said it, but it's in the appendix in her book. She said, for every time a husband took something off his wife's plate in terms of housework at home, the wife thought less about divorce. And the more the husband sat in front of the TV while she was like doing whatever, or went off golfing on Saturday while she did all everything else that needed to happen during the weekend to keep the household running, she's thinking, I got to get out of this, because she doesn't have a partner. And, you know, honestly, I don't think we talk about this very much, but it's the reality. And
I thought most of life that divorces, this is what I thought, it was very simplistic, were caused by just that, the woman doing all the work and the man, not that they agree, but not helping, not being a team. Now, I think, as I've grown older, I think what that means is just a lack of respect for the wife and what she does.
right.
I mean, and I think that many of these rules are about a lack of respect, and the sin is profit. Is that wrong? I mean.
No, I don't think
kind of
that's wrong.
simplistic.
Again, it's like the mutuality is what we're looking for. We together are doing what needs to be done in this life to have a good life together, to have a family that is joyous and healthy and happy, and where everybody's, I mean, we're bad. I'm responsible for the way my children never really picked up, because I would pick up. And the smarter, the better parenting way would have been to say, come on, everybody, boys, we're picking up now. Instead of me just doing it because it's faster. If I just, and I couldn't afford, the time to teach my boys, here's how we put everything back where it needs to be. But then they started to learn that at school. Thank you, teachers, right? So it's not the end of the world when we don't always make good, like when we let it happen. Or we let our husband go do that stuff, and then we sizzle inside. We're so mad, but we can't say a thing. And do you know, I just this week read an article about women in heart disease, and women who don't express their anger get heart disease 50% more. That's what it does to you on the inside. If you can't talk about it and say, I need this from you. This is my pre-marriage advice. My pre-marriage advice, what I say to all, I learned it recently. I only learned it, like 3 years ago. What we, each of us, should say to our partner in the morning. What do you need from me today? What do you need from me today? You know what I need? Could you go to the store for me? I don't have time. I got to make a quick turnaround between this and that. And, we just need these things. Would you get them? Or, you know what? I need encouragement because I'm still trying to work on that sermon. And could you just tell me, you can do it. You can do it. Don't tell me, get on that sermon, right? Or whatever. I mean, you just have to say what you need from your partner. And what do you need from me today? I need you to do this for me. Okay, I'm going to do my best. right? But we're expressing to one another what makes for the kind of mutuality and gets us out of the thing where like, I'm just so pissed off at this, person who doesn't respect me enough, thinks that I've got all the time in the world to do their bidding or, what needs to happen for this family. And I don't. It's wearing me down, wearing me out, right?
Right, but I'm also thinking about, there's a lot of people here who are not in a relationship.
Right.
And so, is it okay to stay with friends?
Mhm.
I really would like this or that, because when you don't have a partner,
Right.
then who do you say it to?
I
If
know.
it's not your friends. Your
Right.
friends are your friends.
Right. Right.
I don't know if that's in the Bible. Or that's-
I think this is when I think, okay, so I'm really sad that I don't have my partner. I loved my husband, right? And we were pretty good together. And then he's been gone. In July, it's gonna be 23 years that I've been by myself, and I raised our children by myself. And now they're 29 and 27. And so I really lament that I don't have a partner, but don't say that to anyone. And don't try to feed people to me, okay? I said something like that, but this is a true story. You guys are gonna crack up. I was teaching as I was teaching at that Lutheran seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. And there was a Lutheran pastor from the Bay Area, I won't name him, who came to do his Doctor of Ministry degree, like it's not a PhD, but it's like how a lot of pastors become doctor, Reverend Doctor, so-and-so, they do it while they're working in the church. They come for a short time and write a project. And this guy was in my class. And I was thinking, I just want to move back to the Bay Area and I'm so lonely. And, this was like 2005 or something like that. And so I made the mistake of saying to this guy, you got anybody in your church that would be like, like good for somebody like me, like they wouldn't freak out because I'm a pastor, or I'm a professor, or have a PhD, or, like whatever. And, and you know what? The next day, that guy offered himself up. I was like, that's not at all what I had in mind. Can you believe that? Anyway, so what I'm saying is, it matters that we are community for each other. Like my heart is broken for single people in our church. And widows, there's a bunch of us now, a lot of widows. And we're used to having a partner. And a lot of us have been married for 50 years and now we don't have that person. And it's heartbreaking and the house is so lonely and empty. And yeah, I can keep myself busy, but where's my partner, right? We need each other. We need to be for each other. That's why I said in my prayer, remember on the cross, when it's one of the 7 last words, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is standing at the foot of the cross, and there's John, John, the disciple, beloved disciple. And Jesus looks at the two of them and he knows he's leaving his mom. And he says to John, behold your mother. And to Mary, behold your son. I'm giving you guys to each other. You're not related, but you are now going to play that role for each other because I'm out. And to me, we're a family. And we, like the ones of us who don't have a partner at home, we got to be in a small group and say, okay, I need help. I got to move, or I got to do something, like stuff that you would ordinarily look to your partner for. we gotta look to each other for that. I think that's what Christian community can be. Most of the time, we're like so afraid to ask anybody. Oh, I don't want to look like, I don't want to bother anyone, or I don't want to, whatever. And we don't ask when we have a need. And then we just run ourselves ragged, or, we hurt ourselves doing something we shouldn't be doing, or what have you. But if we called up a friend and said, okay, I need you. Can you do this for me?
And it works both ways. If you ask a friend for something
Mhm.
and they can help you, they benefit as well.
Right.
It's not like just, and people don't get that. It's like, if I ask for help, that means I'm weak. No, if you ask a friend for help, you are asking them to contribute,
Right,
to be special,
to be your helper,
to be your helper.
right?
And I mean, it's not quite the same as, having a helper living at home,
Right,
but and maybe you don't argue with them as much, I don't know.
right.
But it's a two-way, it's just as much a two-way street.
Yeah.
Almost as having a partner, to ask for that help from a friend. And I think we need to recognize it on both sides. Is that wrong?
I don't think that's wrong. What do others of you think?
I think it's good.
Say that again, Jean?
We only have one mic.
Oh.
Okay. I don't think that's wrong.
Oh.
I think that's what it is, or could be. Right?
It's a hope.
It's a hope. And, and we work with each other's families, and, we know but that means we get to know each other. Like we know what a family member is able to do and what family members are not able to do, but we could do.
It's called bonding.
Yeah, right?
It ties us
It's
together.
Christian community.
Family.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, and oftentimes when people ask me for help, I feel honored that they ask.
Yeah, right. I know, right.
When I ask him.
Well, yeah, but but that's the kind of thing where I've had to say before, I want to buy a new car. Will you go with me? Because I don't want to be like the single lady that they're trying to rip off or something. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's honoring someone, I think. So anyway, okay, Michelle.
Okay, so in the sermon today, you were talking about allyship and the idea that it could be somebody, the idea of a helper could be somebody that is helping you in an area that you don't know about.
Yes.
And so the whole idea of not looking down or up
Right.
necessarily. I was wondering a bit more about the nuance of that, because when I think of the helper and the idea that if you're coming to someone for help, your activity is the driving force. So they're helping you on something that you already had in mind and you're already doing. So I was wondering if that, where the idea of the head of the household fits into that, because if your help, we're doing partnership as in we're doing the same thing together, you're doing this thing and I'm doing that thing, and it's basically the same? Or is it that there's one person who, the Adam is always the driving force of the activity, and the helper is kind of not part of that, but just aiding something that already existed. So I was wondering about the nuance around that and how we get to sort of that it's equal. And the analogy that came into my mind was, when you have these lights for studio lights, and one's called I know the terms are really, they're still called this, the terms are really weird, but there's a master and the slave, and they're the exact same light, right? They're the exact same thing, and they project the same light, they do the same function, but one is the starting point, and the other one follows, even though they're exactly the same.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering where the nuance of the equality comes from.
So what I'm hearing in your question, Michelle, and tell me if I'm getting it right. I'm hearing you asking, is it realistic to have pure equality or an egalitarian relationship where everybody's doing the equal amount of work and all that stuff, doesn't one person have to sort of like maybe be responsible for certain things and the other not, or is that at the nub of what you're trying to get at?
Kind of, because I think that somebody has to start something at
Mhm.
any point, but it's more of the idea of the head of the household idea, and wondering if that's the sort of origin of
Mhm.
it, and it not what's the nuance, because I get that it could be, we're made equally, but
Right.
in terms of who is the driving force of any activity, are we always supporting activity that has somebody else? In this case, the man has always been the driving force for,
Right.
if that makes sense. Anyway.
So I don't know if I have a very good answer for that. The way I think about what you're talking about is, okay, so if I were doing marriage counseling with a couple around this question, then I would allow for individual differences in how any couple sets up their home life. And what I would be wanting to do is give more guidelines for what you need to know, what you would be feeling if it's not working for you. You know, like one person is always the driving force of things and the other person is passive, and it's just becomes very out of balance or whatever. But it doesn't have to be that like we're on the clock and I did these things and now it's your turn to do these things. It's going to be different depending on the people and who they are and what their gifts are and what their passions are and what they're good at and what they enjoy doing. It's where we have to be careful, I think, is when we see one person being, really sinking and disappearing and being, and no longer really truly being a player in the game. I don't really mean that, but a partner. And I don't really know about the nuances of that. I'm sure that like I try to tell myself all the time, and I've said here, well, in our Reformed tradition, we don't have a hierarchy. And like when the Apostle Paul says, Jesus is the head of the man and the man is the head of the woman and like whatever. I think that's like falling into the pattern of, I'm a rabbi and this is my culture and this is what rabbis do. They don't touch women. They don't talk to women. They don't have, they're superior to women. Women don't get to learn these things. And Jesus was like, Mary, you sit right here and listen to what I have to say. And you don't have to be in the kitchen with Martha, right? Jesus was not doing that, hierarchy. And in our Reformed tradition, we say there's God and then there's us. And, and what we're aiming for here, I think, is everyone working, pulling together toward the same good, common good. And, one of the dialogue partners I had in my dissertation was this philosopher named Paul Ricoeur. He was taught for many years at the University of Chicago. And he has a book, was not the book that really I looked at it for my work, but I read it anyway and reading his stuff. It's called One's Self as Another. One's Self as Another. And he says that our way of being human in this world is to think not simply of how I get mine, but how do I help the people in my life be who they can be. And it works when it's mutual. Because if you say, I part of what I exist for is to make my husband happy and thriving, make my children happy and thriving, make my friends happy and thriving. And what I can do, I think about not just myself, I think about what's my role in helping these other people flourish and become who they can become. And if you're doing all of that and nothing's coming back to you, that feels awful over time. But if my partner and my children and my friends are thinking, how can we help Carol be her best self? Then, and we're both, we're taking care of each other in that way. Then it's like everybody wins. To me, that's what the difference, but as living as a Christian person versus living as somebody who doesn't know that the Bible tells us this is what human relationships are supposed to look like. Okay, so it's 12:30. Does anybody have one last observation you want to make, or a burning question, or should we, or if not, we'll wrap it up. But if anybody does, I don't want to.
I just have one thing to say, girl. It's important on the other end, because I can tell you from personal experience that having partners at work.
Yeah.
Right. Is
Right.
very important. And we as individuals need to be willing to accept the help
Right.
also. Because oftentimes we get, full of ourselves or whatever, and it makes us ill. Like I can tell you that from personal experience. And it took wise partners having my back to say, slow down, let us carry that load a little bit, right? And I had to suck it up and say, okay, right? Don't let your pride get in the way of the relationships that we build in Christian community.
Right. And we do it for each other, and it's worked mutually, because I remember, I told the staff, my partners, the first time somebody went into the hospital, I think it was Pat, maybe. That might have been one of the first people that went into the hospital when I was here when she had her stroke. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I have this, and this, but I'm going to have to set those things aside so I can get over to the hospital to see her. And for the first time, I had somebody else that I could say, hey, could you go make that first visit to Pat? And I'll go tomorrow when I can. And I had partners who could do it. And when I was at Chinese Press and I was it, I'm the pastor, it fell to me. And having partners, I almost started to cry. I was like, I think I even said to you guys, I can't believe I can ask somebody to do this for me. Not that I didn't go myself, but not then, immediately, because somebody else had the space that they could do it. And that's how you live in community and partnership that's healthy. And when there's appreciation for one another in helping each other make those things happen, then, then it's like, this is pretty good. It's
How does that message play in the Chinese church?
Well, in Chinese, okay, so I did have, so I was the solo pastor for the English speaking congregation, but I did have a Cantonese speaking pastor who I worked with, who was pastoring the Cantonese speakers. But in the Chinese community, they didn't even need or want the pastor as much as they were more looking to family. If they had a need, it was family that would meet the need. Now, we still did pastoral care there, but it was not, it was like family ties, family bonds were the most important thing. So, I kept saying, well, what's the Deacons Fund? What? You guys buy plates and napkins with the Deacons Fund? The Deacons Fund is supposed to help people that can't pay for the dentist, or, somebody's can't, they need to pay their energy bill, or, how can we help? And Peter said to me, my Cantonese pastor, Oh, Carol, no one would ever come to the church for that. That would be embarrassing. That would be shaming. You would go to your family to get that kind of help. It's a different cultural thing. Yeah. Okay, so I love it if you guys would think about it some more, or as you're thinking about it, or just as you're living your week. If you come up with any questions, just jot them down. Next Sunday, we're going to look at the Adam and Eve and the apple, or it's not really an apple, it's just the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what does that mean? What does it mean that we say that sin enters the world through that act? Okay, so we'll talk next Sunday. And thank you so much for sticking around, and happy Father's Day to our fathers who I hope will be, celebrating in some way, even if it's just a little one. Okay. Thanks.